All right, good evening and welcome to the, Tuesday, June 27th meeting of the Elementary School Building Committee. I'll do a quick run through of our agenda. So following our usual opportunity for public comment, we will review and approve some meeting minutes as well as invoices. We will then go back to our discussion from the last meeting on interior materials and have some further review of that. I think Perkins has done some work based on our feedback, so we'll have an opportunity to also do a final vote on our choices around interior materials. We'll see some design updates. We will discuss the topic of the site work and specifically stormwater management, which is a topic that has come up at several of our forums recently. We will take a vote on the method of construction, whether we use a general contractor or a construction manager at risk for the delivery of the project. We'll talk about the date for the next community forum and a schedule update for our meetings over the summer, because while it is the summer, we've got a lot to do in the next couple of months. So we definitely will be filling it with some meetings and community forums. So with that, I would open up our opportunity for public comment, but looking at our audience, it does not appear that we have anybody here for public comment. So if somebody does show up, then I'll entertain the opportunity to reopen that if a member of the public does arrive. So next, we are going to we're going to review and hopefully approve meeting minutes. And the first ones that we have are May 9th. I opened the 23rd and I knew that wasn't right. Okay, so the meeting minutes for May 9th. Does anyone have any comments, questions, or edits for the May 9th minutes? Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I move the minutes of May 9th as written.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, motion by Mike, second by Bill. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed or abstaining? No. So that is unanimous. It's 5.
Yeah.
5. Nancy hasn't gotten the rule that we're all supposed to sit together to make it easier on her. No, I'm just Okay, and next we are going to look at the minutes for May 23rd of 2023. Are there any questions, comments, or edits on the May 23rd minutes? Okay.
I would move the minutes of May 23rd, 2023 as written in the draft.
Second.
Okay, so motion by Mike, second by Nancy. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And opposed or abstaining? So it's unanimous, and those are approved. Next, we've got some bills to pay. So we have an invoice package in our meeting packet. There are 3 total invoices. One payable to Vertex in the amount of $11,365.75. One to Perkins Eastman in the amount of $45,000, and one to W.J. Diana Backhoe in the amount of $2,220. So total invoices to be paid tonight, $58,585.75. Any questions or comments on the invoices? So can I get a motion to approve the approval for payment of the invoice package totaling $58,585.75?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, motion by Mike, second by Jagroot. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, then those are approved. And I believe that ends the administrative portion of the meeting. So I will turn it over to Bob. Are we doing design updates first?
So we'll talk about the agenda first,
Okay.
and then I'll just give a little overview of our response to a cost question of the last meeting, and then I'll turn it over to Bob to do the design presentation. So we'll scroll forward one to the agenda. Yeah. So tonight you went through and did the minutes and invoices. We're going to do a design update of the overall, any tweaks to the interior floor plan of design. Bob's got a few minor updates. As John noted, we'll talk about site and stormwater management, and Dan will be pinch hitting for his civil engineer making that presentation. And then we'll get into the discussion period about interior finishes and looking for consensus on the finishes to move forward with, and the contractor versus general contractor versus construction manager delivery method. And then lastly, we want to talk about the community forum dates and when we want to have those and how many over the course of the summer. What I'd like to touch base on is there was a question that came up at the last couple of forums about what's the relative cost of the components of the building. And so the next slide, you have that loaded in there.
It's actually down here, but
Right, yeah, right there. Starts to break that up for the group. And so what Chris did here was he pulled together our PSR estimate, and this is uniformat, which is by building component. And he tried to break it down in terms of the overall percentage buckets. So this gives you an idea of the relative weight of individual components of the building. Now, I'll note this is based on the PSR, so all the decisions that we made over the last couple of months will change the ebbs and flows of this. And so any decision you make that increases one obviously decreases the relativeness of another. But in big picture standpoint, you know, the foundations and substructure is about 4%. The superstructure itself, so the building skeleton and the structural components of it, is about 8%. The envelope enclosure, so that energy efficient building envelope we have developed, is 11% of it. With exterior walls and then windows, kind of giving the breakdown there of doors, how that 11% kind of then breaks down. The roof itself is 3%. But the interiors portion is 15%. And so you looked at the exterior, you made some decisions on that. Tonight we're talking about interiors, and so you'll understand as you look at the dollars per square foot of the various flooring, wall, and ceiling options, it doesn't make up a huge percentage of the overall building. So make the right decision, but don't get hung up on how it affects the overall ability of the project to be on budget. So you want to look at the balance of the maintenance cost, the first cost, and the long-term durability of those particular elements that Bob's going to represent tonight. Then we get into the conveying, which are just elevators, and then plumbing makes up 4.5%. HVAC is 17.5%. And the committee made the conscious decision of going geothermal, which is one of the things driving that cost up. But this slide here does not recap the rebates that are coming back. So it's an upfront first cost related to a higher HVAC cost, but there's also money back at the end that will, you know, bring the overall cost down of the project. And then electrical is also up because newer buildings are more electrified, so that's a higher percentage than traditional buildings even a few years back. And then lastly, the site construction on your project, you have a fairly large site, and that makes up about 11.5% of the overall cost. We'll update these again after we get the finalized cost estimate, you know, because I'm sure this question will come up again in the public. And these will all change based on the relative decisions that you've made over the past couple of months. So any questions on that kind of context, so as you kind of continue on with your thought process? No. Okay.
Very helpful.
All right, so I'll turn it over to...
Actually, sorry,
Yeah.
I do have one question. So when you said the electrical utilities slightly higher percentage because buildings are more electrified, do you mean because of the change in kind of the way the HVAC systems work, or the increase in technology that's in the building?
Great questions. So all of it.
Okay.
So you've made the decision so far to be an all-electric building, meaning you have no gas-fired equipment in the building. Technology morphs monthly sometimes, but certainly yearly and every couple of years. And so there's more things that are now connected to each other electronically. So, you know, over the last 10 years, each iteration, you keep getting more and more systems talking to themselves or talking to each other. It used to just be a building management system that was only the mechanical equipment itself, and then you add in the water heaters, and now the lighting is a smart system, and now all these things want to talk to each other, and your refrigerator has an alarm that ties to the fire alarm, which then beeps onto Tim's cell phone in case there's a low freeze, you know, thing. So there's all these things that have grown over the last, 10 to 15 years, and so that's what I mean by the electrification of the building continues to be a larger percentage of the overall building cost.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, and again, this is a really extremely helpful slide. If you could, I know this wasn't in the...
Yeah, we can send it to you
If
for
you can
record. Yeah, we worked
send
on
it to the
this
committee
today.
would
Yep.
be, yeah.
Thank you.
I guess I would just add, all that to lower operating costs as well. So there may be more upfront costs, but the goal there is to even out or lower operating costs.
Yeah, the more things speaking to each other allows you to fine tune the building more so now than it did, a few years back.
One of the reasons we chose this structure is because the MSBA publishes the SD estimates in this format going back for the last 10 years on all of their elementary schools. So it gives you a good benchmark to see how other projects have broken down over the last 10 years. When you're looking at your project, even though they're different price points, the percentage of structure versus wall versus other elements of the building gives you an idea of where you fit in the overall process.
That's great.
One question, where do the traffic elements fall? Does that fall under site construction?
Be under site, yeah.
And certainly the SDF will have more detail available to us, so we can break out certain portions of it if that's what the committee would like to see. But at a high level, this gives you a good benchmark.
Thank you. This is very helpful.
All right, so I'll turn it over to the design team. Bob's gonna go first.
Okay, so I'll just start with the overall floor plan. Not a lot has changed. I think we were here last and we reported on some of what we heard at the second round of faculty focus groups, and there are a few standing questions. We're waiting for the superintendent to get back and to get back to us on some minor changes, but we're down to the realm of just like an office or two, and whether it's one big space or split in half. So these really aren't scope issues. The one place that we have been continuing to evolve are the mechanical spaces, as well as the cafeteria. So on this plan, the what you can see here over on the upper left by the gymnasium is what we're calling a mechanical mezzanine. So we've got a very large 2.5-story structure that's the volume of the gym. We have some offices, toilets, and storage space at the beginning, so we're trying to use that first structural bay to put some mechanical equipment in there. Right now, we don't have it reconciled with the actual equipment. The alternative to putting the equipment here is just to put it on the roof. But that, is pretty tall equipment. Prefer not to do that, even for the longevity of it. This is somewhat free space. It's not entirely free. If the offices, storage, and everything existed as kind of smaller space, we'd either have to build the walls all the way up the 2.5 stories or insert some sort of ceiling, kind of roof system within that space. There certainly could be other options explored, but we kind of saw this as kind of an easy grab, not much of a premium to protect the mechanical equipment. So that still needs to be reconciled. In the bottom right, on the first floor plan, you can also see that we have a tiny little mechanical basement space. We may be referring to it as a crawl space. We're actually putting a finished floor in it, so I'm not sure we can call it a crawl space. The idea here is that the grade slopes pretty significantly, 12 feet across the face of the building, about 20 feet from one side to the other side of the site. So to fill with soil costs money. If you can find things like stormwater, containment, or carving out spaces like this, it's not an entire add of construction. It's somewhat filling the void. In this case, we have the geothermal wells and the piping that's coming in kind of at this level anyway, so it's natural to have the pumps for the geothermal at this level rather than having them up higher and having to pump the water and the flow upward. So this again just seems like a kind of easy grab and something that we're still exploring. Any questions on this? I'll move into the cafeteria where we have some additional changes.
I have a question, bro. It's more related to Tim. It seems like all the school projects we've done, when the project is done, the contractor leaves you spare parts. I forget what you call those spare parts.
Attic stock.
But they're always much more than you ever envisioned. For Marathon, Tim had center school, moved all that crap down there. Is there a place here for all that spare parts?
We're staying within the MSBA's allowance for custodial storage.
Yeah.
It's never enough.
Yeah.
And so I can tell you that some of the things that we're looking at are the potential for spaces like this.
Yeah.
It's possible when we look at this further that it may be just as economical to provide more unused or kind of basement space.
We also have in the gymnasium, I was only pointing out kind of the southern edge of the gymnasium, but we do have some other toilet room and storage spaces on the east side. And so we're planning on, providing an access ladder and its additional storage,
Could
something
it
like that.
be simpler for us just to spend $4,000, buy a container, somehow bury it on site for Tim's Park, all that crap? I mean, I realize, because nobody's ever envisioned enough space. It was shocking our marathon as to where we're gonna put this crap. And so a more reasonable approach, rather than spending the money on the infrastructure for the school, the hardware, is to get a container or two and somehow plant plants around them, and they'll last probably as long as the school does.
You could do a gravel pad somewhere
It'd
for
be
it.
way cheaper, right?
It's a lot less money. The other thing we can do is look at the specifications, have a conversation about what you really need for attic stock, because sometimes you get like so much ceiling tile or so much floor tile that you're like, it's a whole building's worth, and you're like, I'll never need
Exactly.
this much of it. But you paid for all of it.
I just wanted
So
to
it's
think
kinda
about it
something you
now,
might wanna look at
rather
saving
than
them a
3
little
years
money
from
on.
now when we say, oh crap, what are we gonna do with this stuff?
What is it called?
Attic stock. Basically, they give you like 2 cans of paint of every color in the entire building.
all the floor tile, all the ceiling
Ceiling
tile.
tiles.
It's a lot of stuff.
We're not
To fill
gonna have
half
that
of
many
this room.
colors, are we?
Talk to them.
We don't make that
Usually don't have
decision.
that many colors.
Yeah, if
We'll
you're
have-
asking me that question, Mrs. Conner, no, we're not gonna have
Dude,
that many
Gray and
colors.
white show everywhere.
Just so we're thinking about it, I know.
No, it's a good point. I mean, usually you end up, that is kind of a real shock
Yeah.
when the contractor says, I've got to turn these things over, where do you
Where do you want this
them?"
stuff?
And everyone's like, well, how much is it? And they're like, it's basically a tractor trailer truck full of stuff.
I know.
Well, and again, from the cost perspective, as we're trying to be sensitive to that, it's not only, I mean, you're now not only the materials you're paying for, but now you've got to actually
them.
increase the cost
Provide a
because now you
place
need a
for it,
place
yeah.
to store them. It seems
Yeah.
like if we could do anything to limit that to what is reasonable to operate the building, that would be good on a whole
Yeah.
lot.
Probably
And
would work
thinking
better for
about the
everybody.
materials or the tile or the different things we'd use, that would help manage that, right? To not have as many different things.
Yes.
So that when they give you extra,
Yes, if you like, it's better to have 2 types of ceiling tile than 10.
Yeah.
You
For
get,
marathon school, I have 33 5-gallon bucket of paint, because that's one
Yeah,
for every
it-
paint color.
it's a lot of stuff.
That's a lot.
what's the shelf life on that?
That's the other thing, is some of these things
Not
don't
worth
last.
storing 33 5-gallon
So
bucket of paint.
I think you will be on the color committee then. When it's-
Old Elmwood could use some painting.
That's right. That's right. Not a whole white, 1 accent wall, Bob. That's
All white one.
So for cafeteria updates,
Thank you, Mike.
this may evolve again, but I think last time we were here, we talked about the stage had moved. We tried to make some improvements and find a variety of space. There's a group like the Lunch Club that really should be kind of tucked a little bit away, quieter space, but still connected. So what you're seeing here is, I think we presented two options, at least to the working group, where we had the faculty dining or the lunch bunch. Faculty dining is shown in red and kind of the right-hand side. The lunch bunch is the left-hand square room by the entry vestibule. It's officially part of the cafeteria square footage. This layout was preferred. I know the faculty will prefer it. They did not want to be so visibly and directly connected to the cafeteria, but wanted to be nearby. We also realized that by creating the lunch group in this location near the entry vestibule, it becomes just a very versatile, multi-purpose space throughout the day, additional meeting space. So it seems to work out well. Not an increase in square footage, it's just a rejuxtaposition.
I'm sorry, what is the lunch crew that you're talking about?
It's
Lunch
referred
bunch.
to as the lunch bunch. So for some, I don't know the specifics of all the students, but some of them, students that have sensory issues, maybe can be overwhelmed, whether it's acoustic, visual, combination of the two.
Thank you.
And it could also be social issues like people who, students who struggle to argue appropriately or, manage conflicts or, so the guidance team invites kids, they usually have 3 or 4 lunch bunches per day with probably 4 or 5 students in a bunch. And they just talk or, they talk through what if I wasn't here and this happened? So they just work through problems that might naturally occur at lunch. But right now, that happens in their guidance space. So they go get their lunches, they walk down the hall with their food, they go into the counseling space and eat there and then go back. So I had not heard this update, and I think that's great.
Yeah, and I think the preference is not only for the flexibility and multi-purpose of having this room that's available, but it's preferred to have the lunch bunch connected and with the opportunity to visually be connected to the rest of the cohort, not necessarily in a separate.
And when we think about the counselors being potentially on the third floor, to get lunch and go to the third floor to eat it would really be a challenge.
Would be their lunch break.
Yes. Sometimes it is already, just to get down the hall.
Bob, thinking about that space though as kind of a flex space throughout the day, getting to it seems challenging. So the entrance to the cafeteria is all the way down the other end, and then you come through, or is that, am I reading that wrong?
No, the dotted line that you see between the cafeteria and the entry lobby
That's open.
Yeah.
is open.
Oh, that's fully open? Okay, all right, cool.
And we can talk in more detail. This is not the end of design, obviously, when we get into design development. Should it be wide open? Should there be some sort of operable? Should it be a wall with a set of several sets of doors? So there's still the opportunity.
On the stage, I see some tables. Are those designed to be tables for lunches?
They are included in the overall count, which exceeds 400. So the target lunch size here is 400. So we can fit the full 400 seats in the lower portion. We're showing that there's the opportunity to also use that upper portion to seize some of the variety.
Is there enough opportunity to take one of the lunch periods away? Or lunch blocks away? How many do we have proposed now? Is it 4?
It's designed for three specifically. It's part of the educational program, which is part of the MSBA approval. So we really need to meet those educational objectives. 3, I think there were thoughts of 4 would help manage the size of the room, but it would also extend the lunches, scheduling them very early and very late in the day. 3 is far preferred, but 3 in an environment that can be broken up a little bit.
And you're talking about 100 up or 100 down or 200 up in terms of going from 3 to 2 or
It's not quite
3 to
enough.
4.
But
So
at least you've got the extra room there. Excellent.
So Bob, I'm sorry, the outside the cafeteria, we're buying into the no doors on the boys and the girls room? Is that?
That's
I
right.
like the idea, but it looks to be on your plan, that's what the plan is.
Yeah, that's also for the sake of safety and
Yeah. I can see it, don't get me wrong, I just, I thought it was a neat idea when somebody proposed it 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
It'd be great for Tim, it'd be, for the teachers, it'd be great,
Yeah, and we'll walk you through that real world examples, like Ashland's opening up down the street in a month, right? So we'll be able to take you right down there and you'll see it.
I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, we got to see some opportunities on the tours we did as well. And, they have the privacy wall when you still walk in. So it's not like you're looking into a bathroom from the doorway.
Yeah.
And it seemed to really work in those spaces when we were there visiting. So
Yeah, just eliminating the doors and the hardware.
Helps with cleanliness too. I mean, kids are always touching the door anyway. Some wash their hands, some don't. So, it's,
Well, I just, I think it's a great idea.
And the sinks are on the outside.
in this proposed plan, the sinks are on the outside in a communal area. But that decision can still be made. You could still put the sinks back inside and have an open floor plan, but this is recommended to consolidate it for space reasons.
yeah.
and if the space is open for community use, you also have direct access that isn't hidden around a corner or something or down a hallway.
Yeah. Great. Sounds like a plan.
Other questions on the cafeteria changes?
I will say that we're still going to continue to look at the placement of the kitchen custodial. That was something that came up last time. Again, it's not a scope change. It'll just be part of the refinements into design development.
Okay.
Great.
Onto interior materials. So we really have the same information that we brought the first time with some changes or some supplements based on comments that we heard. So one of the things we did is we don't have the full takeoff of all the areas within the school, so we can't give an accurate picture of what might be drywall, what might be certain finishes. It's a little bit easier for us to get floor or ceiling finishes because the areas are a little bit easier to kind of quickly calculate. So on the left-hand side, you can see we've taken the floor plan and we've broken it down into different types of spaces that would likely maybe get different materials. So we can apply the square foot of the material to the square foot of the areas that we think should get those materials. That's what we had shown last time. The wainscot, which is the wall protection that runs up, in this case we're saying 4 feet high, we did a linear takeoff. It's not going to be exact, but this is all for relative costs. So we're just going to start with ceilings, walls, floors, and wainscot. So what we talked about last time were the pretty common standard materials, the high performance acoustic ceiling, trying to limit the number of tile types for a couple of reasons. One, as we just discussed, for the sake of maintenance and stock. The other, because learning occurs everywhere. Even the corridors are breakout spaces for learning, so acoustics are important. We also know we have painted drywall ceiling. You can see between the acoustic tile and drywall, there's a big difference there's a difference in the price. It's more expensive. We try to avoid drywall, which is also called soffits. There are areas like toilet rooms or vestibules that receive a lot of moisture, and so it is recommended in those locations. Then we have, of course, painted structure. When we say painted structure, it's also, there's a little bit of a premium in the structure because it'll be an acoustic deck, which this is not, that I can tell. But painted structure, yeah, exactly what we're seeing above us. Otherwise inexpensive. And then we introduced the acoustic wood look ceiling, which is the most expensive of the materials. And our conversation here was, well, maybe we can avoid this, may at least scale it back. And so one of the things we did is when we put costs to all these, our proposal was pretty much everywhere in the school would be the acoustic ceiling tile. We would limit the drywall to vestibules and maybe just a little bit of the corridors and restrooms. The painted structure would be in the gym, the stage, mechanical, electrical, and IT spaces. And we were going to have the cafeteria and entry vestibules with the wood look. That was about $180,000 of the total price. What we're proposing is to scale that back and look at the cafeteria and actually use a combination of exposed painted structure, which is on the lowest end, acoustic deck, but then incorporate just a little touch of this so it can help us dress the stage, get some good reflection for any performances. So you can see it comes way down, more than $100,000 to just limit the use of it. So that is one of the updates, and we're happy to entertain others, even built into the vote. We move on to the wall finishes, and what we've added here, the first box that you see was drywall, which is kind of the base material that we'll use everywhere. So what we wanted to do was incorporate what's called FRP. Do you know what the acronym stands for, or the
Fiberglass reinforced panel?
Yep. Panel? Is that what it is? We know it is FRP. It comes in a lot of different looks. Some of it is very, what I would say is hospital grade, kind of that bubbly white that you may have seen, very inexpensive. It can also look like a little bit of a wood or a grainy veneer. It's still flush, it's still cleanable, it's still the same material. So we have used this on schools. Essex Technical High School actually has FRP in the corridors. You can see it's much less expensive than the porcelain wainscot, which is what we were proposing for all the corridors. We also started a discussion in this group about, well, how do you handle the seams? Because that's the trick with this material. In and of itself, it's great, but then it's a thin material, it's got seams. If they are picked at or worked on over time, you can see there's a 20-year life compared to a 50-year, but that doesn't mean that there won't be places where it's going to require some repair and attention. When we've used it, we've detailed it to try to really cap the top of it and control it and have tighter seams. I think in Essex we used
we used wood, a wood cap, and then we used this underneath it.
Yeah.
To kind of hold it, so it didn't have the plastic piece at the top.
Yeah, at the Marathon School, there was a lot of discussion about it. I
Yeah.
was thinking about it after our
Yeah.
last meeting. They did like a metal cap.
Yeah,
something like
fluted.
And there was something with that. I remember going back and forth with the architect. And
There was a lot of
finish on
different
it.
structures, the metal cap, also the outside corners,
yeah,
and the piece with the pieces joined one another. There was a vertical strip that,
yeah.
you know, it looks pretty industrial. My
Yeah.
question was whether or not it's been, you know, in terms of having, you know, first graders in there for 5 years,
Yeah.
how's it holding up?
Yeah. So I did
Less
take-
about how it looks.
I did take a walk through and I talked to Mrs.
Okay.
DeBoe, the principal down there, just to ask her how she felt like it was holding up. I noticed some bubbling in some areas around the building. Stuff that I actually talked to DRA about, but you know, we'll move forward with that.
Sure.
A separate thing. But so I think cleanability, it's been fine. I haven't noticed any damage to it, any picking or anything like that. I don't know if the bubbling is from installation or if it's from being 5 years old, you know, so I kind of really picked at it myself in my last walkthrough of the space, so I think it's an option that works for that, you know. I'd be curious to see what our breakdown of this between, you know, so there we have a lot of cubbies that take up most of the wall space. I'm assuming here we're gonna have a lot of lockers that'll take up that space, although I don't know how we landed with the second and third grades on lockers versus cubbies, but anyway, I think there's wall space that won't be included as part of this.
Yeah, we will have lockers. That'll be primarily contained to the neighborhoods.
Yeah.
So there's lots of corridor that's outside
Yeah.
of those neighborhoods, kind of
So
the main
I-
traffic areas.
I don't know if I would be nervous with a super long stretch of this on how that would look going down the hallway or its function.
I was just thinking there are places where it would probably work and cut down the $34 square foot price. In other words, the high use areas where obviously the front, you know, getting to the gym, getting to the
Yeah.
cafeteria, those places that take a lot of abuse,
Yeah.
probably want to be more like the $34 square foot porcelain towers.
Agreed, yeah.
But you get upstairs in the corridors going through classroom 1 through 10, maybe we could do that, save a little bit of money.
Yep.
You know, because that's not going to have the same, you know, wear and tear, I think, as
Yeah.
getting into the place
Agreed, yeah.
and the public places.
Yep.
You guys mentioned you're using some of that or you're getting ready to use it. Do you have any longevity results where you've used it 10 years ago, or was it available 10 years ago for you folks?
Available for quite some time. I don't know
10
how
years?
it's performing after 10 years, but everything that's been mentioned I've seen.
Okay.
So it does have it has a T-bulb that actually holds the two panels together, and those start to delaminate. It has to be fully glued to the wall. And if it's not fully glued to the wall, it can start to bubble or peel.
Think Formica.
Yeah.
You know,
But I guess the point
we
is
used to
that-
use it a lot in the trash room, the back of house, right? So like you'd wash out the barrels. That's where we started using it, you know, decades ago. And so those walls would be floor to ceiling, and then it became a cost alternative for value engineering for the hallways, right? When you're starting to consider some of these other more expensive products, and that's where it kind of worked its way into the system.
Maybe a combination of what Mike suggested, we use it where we think we can get away with it, and even if
Yeah.
it's only 20 or even 10, it's a third of the cost, so we can do the math going
you could do it
forward.
twice for the same.
A couple of times, yeah.
I've used it in commercial food service, both gone in and taken it out and also put it in new. It does yellow over time. Like there's a noticeable fading as it gets to the 10, 15, 20 year age. It can stain over time, and repeated abrasion. So if you have something like cart traffic, for instance, which is common in food service environments, that's constantly rubbing against the wall, it can start to cut through the surface, which is basically just a resin holding the fiberglass together, and that can create a rough edge. But that's in a commercial environment where it's taking a lot of abuse, not necessarily this application.
That's kind of what you opened up with earlier, Jeff, on helping us understand are we talking about a $2,000 savings here or $22,000? So, yeah, we'll kind of have to wait. Thank you.
So I'll get to the next slide. Nothing's changed with the CMU walls as far as the durability, appropriate places to use it, or ceramic tile in toilet rooms. So if we look at the square footage, we are suggesting that, we're showing two options here where the FRP wainscot could be used at the heart of school corridors and cafeteria, same with the with porcelain tile wainscot, and you can see the difference, 212 versus 516, so that's the order of magnitude. So if we could do a hybrid where we just focus on the high traffic volume areas, the community areas, and keep those the porcelain, but then go to the FRP when you get into the quiet academic zone. So you'll have a blended rate. We won't have the numbers for you now, but that's certainly a direction to go in. And then we would still suggest the stairwell, gymnasium, restrooms, at least the large group restrooms being CMU. And then we would use ceramic tile on wet walls, particularly the single-user bathrooms. And then just moving on, we don't have anything to show on floors. We introduced linoleum, porcelain tile, the rubber tile, and of course the wood flooring in the gymnasium. Epoxy as an option, ceramic tile floor in toilet rooms, the use of rubber for stair treads. The VCT flooring was not recommended, but we put the cost on here. And so what we were, I don't think we heard necessarily the need for a change, but the linoleum is the primary flooring throughout the school. The porcelain tile, we're suggesting, just like the wainscot, maybe only in the heart of the school, the high traffic area. The stairs would have the rubber tile, potentially. We wouldn't recommend it at the gym or the corridors. The gymnasium and the stage would be a wood floor. And then in the kitchen, I think there was some discussion about this, but there's the epoxy floor as an option versus ceramic tile. That was a restroom option.
It's a restroom option.
Okay. And then the rubber treads, as I had mentioned, but I can scroll back and forth through these. You can see the magnitude of costs. Pretty inexpensive to use linoleum. That is the majority use here, coming in just under $1 million for all the majority of the flooring. And then the limited use of porcelain, the appropriate use of the wood, and the epoxy, ceramic, and other.
So, well, I'm sorry, I might have misheard you. Did you say, so for the stairs, is it rubber tile?
It's a combination. There's rubber treads that actually are the
Rubber
whole
tread,
length,
okay.
and then there's rubber tile at the landings.
Okay, I didn't see any, like when you get to the cost per square foot and approximate square footage, that's
Yeah, rubber treads are the treads.
the rubber
and
treads, but there's no rubber,
tiles
the
are
rubber
at-
tiles zeroed out.
They're before this.
Yeah.
Rubber floor tile
Oh,
stairs.
it's-
Nobody's saying the
There's
stairs.
no square footage or
There's no
total.
square
They're
footage.
not recommending a difference for the
It's sold
stairs.
by
right?
linear foot.
Okay,
So basically, the back of house stairs will have the rubber treads, and if there's a front of house stair, that could have a different.
okay.
they
Pretty
consider
much
it
the only thing you
front of
want
house
on
for
the
now.
stage.
Yeah, I just was trying to figure out because it didn't have the cost in there, so I didn't know.
Talk about stairs, I wanna make- Well, you're kind of hiding the front stairs morphed, right? So it's no longer a grand stair.
Yeah, so what we're
Yeah, what I was saying to Bob is, so right now that there's back of the house stairs, which are the end of the three wings, and then
Yep.
over the gymnasiums, those would have the rubber treads. The front of house stair, which would be at the front entrance, could be a couple of different things. Earlier iterations had it more of a grand open stair, in which case you may want a terrazzo tread, and there's an upcharge for that, but it's the first impression, so most schools tend to do that. Lately, I think you've slid that back in the lobby.
I would say it's still pretty visible. When you come in, you'll see that, and you'll see through to the outdoor spaces. So it's still prominent, and we've also done it with porcelain as well as an option. Relatively small in the scheme of things, but
Any more slides on this?
I don't think so. No.
So it looks like there's been some additional cost savings on some things that you shared. And it's kind of hard to keep track of everything here, but have you Is there a cumulative number now on what we've seen, even though we know this isn't the end? Because, Mike suggested the hybrid, and that will be another number. Is there a cumulative number on everything? And where I'm going with it, if so, where is that compared to what the allowance was on the construction budget that we started with a long time ago?
So I'll need Dan's help with this, but for what we're seeing now, for the material choices that we were starting with, which on the interior didn't seem to be that divergent, from what you would expect. But based on the comments, this is about a $400,000 swing reduction.
Okay.
It seems like it's about $100,000 in the cafeteria ceiling, and it's about $300,000 in the wainscot. Well, actually, this will be a blended, so it might be more like $350,000 swing.
Okay. Thank you.
As far as how that compares to the initial costs, they were square foot costs, so they didn't get into the details, but they were based on probably very similar material choices.
Right, so the prior estimate was more blended. Now every estimate we get gets more and more granular, and you'll start to see things broken out. It started as kind of a whole wall assembly. Now you're talking about what's the skin of that wall. How thick is that wall? So,
And I know, I love your phrase, the pencils go down on July 12th, this gets sent out. Have any of the estimates here had a second look from an estimator or estimate standpoint, or these are still ranges that we started with a few months ago?
There's still ranges.
the ranges, because it changes month to month, right? More so last year when things were more up and down with the economic times. But Dan pulled this together based on the recent bids as of a couple months ago, and the data he's getting from his estimators.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the square foot numbers they're more recent. Like I did pass those by the estimator to make sure that we weren't way off on those numbers.
So like, for instance, the first one may have been 10 to 20 a year ago or 6
The
months
FRP
ago.
one?
What's that?
FRP?
Yeah, well, no, that was brand new
It
anyway.
was $10
but
before, yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right. No, that's good. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Some of them have had quite a jump. Like the ceramic tile has went up quite a bit in the last couple of years.
I think that you have to understand where we are in the process, and I think what the committee has the option to do now is to select certain areas where they'd like to look at options, the things that Perkins has flagged as options that we could identify for the estimators. The estimator really becomes the dividing line that says it is or is not this cost, because that's the information that we're going to take to the community ultimately after this committee approves the design. And so if there's options that have been presented here that offer savings, like the FRP being a good example, that's something where we can look at the cost of both and isolate that in the ultimate estimate so that you can make a more informed decision of the actual cost of that choice, not the relative cost of that choice.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
So we are hoping for a vote. This isn't a vote to,
Consensus.
consensus.
I think we did consensus on the exteriors.
Yeah, because it's a fluid process. When you see the numbers that come back from the estimate, we could dial it up or back, right? If we decide that the blended rate, we went too far one way or the other, you can say change it to a 60-40 split or a 30-70 split, right? So.
And I'm assuming when we talk about, because I think the one thing that's obviously the savings are significant, but we also don't want to go with the full FRP because of the wear and tear and aspects of it. But there's also a part of me that keeps looking at this slide with the split and thinking, is it going to affect the look of the school in terms of having that hybrid approach? Right? We don't want to. I mean, we want to save money, but we also don't want it to look like like a Frankenstein's monster kind of put together as. So I guess as we go through this process, that's where we should be looking to you guys to tell us.
Yeah.
This is because right now, as I look at these two squares, I can't really picture what that looks like in the larger
CAD
scheme.
drawing or something
And
we
so,
could see?
anything we could get to have the assurance that, I mean, and again, I know you're not going to let us go down a road you're going to build the school and we're going to say, what is that? But
But
yeah.
but all this is why we have Bob.
Right.
Yeah.
Bob's not gonna design something that looks bad, because the next school he goes to, he's not gonna say, look at Elmwood School, a great job we did. So you know Bob's gonna make it look good. Right, Bob?
Yeah, and I would raise a flag if I had concerns. This is actually a pretty solid approach, that you've got high-traffic community areas. You know, the school is zoned to accommodate a change in materials. And it's not as though it's binary, that you just open a door and it's suddenly an entirely different palette. We have ways of kind of working or transitioning to these spaces that'll make sense.
And we're not giving you, and to be clear, like, we're not, as we move through this process, we're not saying to you, you get X, we want X amount of this and Y amount of this. You're gonna come, if we say it's a hybrid, you're gonna come back and tell us, this is what makes sense as a hybrid, based on those zones, based on the wear and tear, based on the look. Is that fair?
That's what we want.
Yeah.
That's what, because that's what we're looking for, okay.
Yeah.
It's basically making a rule.
Yeah.
It's almost like the entire front on the first floor of the public area is going to be the porcelain, and all the classroom wings, when you open those doors, they're all FRP.
Yeah, I mean, it's no different than all the user meetings that have occurred, right? Where the teachers say, I need storage, or I need this, or I need that, and then the designers churn it through and come back with a proposal of how that looks. And so the same process will follow here.
And the alternates give you that option as well. If you say, I like the savings of the FRP, but I'm concerned about the look, we can price as an alternate, you know, a base level tile versus everywhere we have FRP, and you can see a dollar value that's associated with that.
I absolutely have no problem with that approach. It's a good approach. And the other thing is, when the numbers come in, and hopefully much lower than we anticipate, then maybe we say, no, we'll do less FRP and we'll do more tile. But yeah, I think absolutely that kind of information would be really helpful in terms of, you know, what the potentials are. Yeah. We all want it to be a great looking school. We just don't want it to go crazy on the cost.
Yeah, I just appreciate the work you put into this, and the details you're giving us is going to allow us to make a much more informed decision. So this feels like you're going down the right path as far as a consensus. If that's all we're kind of agreeing to, is that, are we going in the right direction?
But in terms of, I'm absolutely comfortable with where we are right now with the interior finishes. And you other board members can speak up on your own, so we have consensus as what we need.
Yeah, maybe, so if are there other questions or comments from anyone, and then maybe I'll try to recap what we've got here so that we sort of have a documented consensus.
No questions.
What's that? Tim?
No, good, thank you.
Because this is all you once you get started.
So the question is whether that's good enough for Bob.
So to recap, when it comes to the, we're giving general consensus of what, largely what's proposed in the interior materials presentation, from the ceiling finishes, that revised proposal that combines the painted structure ceiling and acoustical wood ceiling, this sort of revision you've done, and then with the directive to do a hybrid of the FRP and the porcelain tile wainscot in the places where it makes sense to do either one. Does that give you enough of what you need?
Absolutely.
Okay. Everybody comfortable with that?
Great.
Yes.
All right. So, we ready to talk stormwater?
Moving on. We are. So we talked earlier about how we did have the test pits dug out there, and the test pits did, our geotechnical information showed that the water table was about 2 feet below the grade. It turns out from the 3 test pits, it's actually about 5.5 to 6 feet below the grade, which is good news. Not great, but better than 2 feet. So this first drawing that Steve Powers from Semiotis provided me with drawings and notes. So you'll see me putting my glasses on to read the little notes. This first drawing illustrates the watersheds that are there. You can see the watershed 1 is substantial, and I think that's the one that's of the most concern to the neighboring properties. Yeah. That's the one that pushes all that water down towards that neighborhood. The watershed 5, 4, 2, and 3, those all get captured by those wetlands that are in those areas. So they're all spilling off towards those bodies that are catching them. So there's catchment areas for those other 4 watersheds, but that one really large one where we're putting the building is the one that is the primary one. We also are going to get some more data on the northern part here in order for him to understand, because right now you're looking at just a piece, but he needs to see, we've already gotten the data because there was already information that was transmitted over on the northern piece here, because that, obviously, we have this big grade coming down, there's stuff coming down from there too. So that's going to be factored in here as well, so that piece of it is not being left behind.
Do you want to just point that out on the screen behind you or with your mouse? Yeah.
Right here, this
There you
is
go.
this big area here.
So the Blueberry Lane extension area,
So
essentially.
so it's still coming down this way, right? So this, we don't want to say, oh, we start here. We're actually going back up into here to understand how that affects this watershed as well. And Bob mentioned earlier, there's about a 20-foot grade change from that side of the site to down on this side of the site. So here's the proposed watershed map and how this is going to change. He's adding a new watershed 7, which is going to be the, and 6, which are the two that are the building what we're developing. So watershed 7, there's going to be, you'll see on the further drawing, there'll be underground detention for the field there to capture any of the runoff from that area. And then on watershed 6, there's multiple detention areas, which I'll show on the next slide, that are under the front parking lot and under the play area, and one of the play areas in the back, and then an open air detention too. He's suggesting that those are less expensive, and maybe there's some combination of underground and open air that's the right combination. So they're looking at what that combination is. So this shows how we're going to alter the watershed pattern, but the important thing is that any water that is on any of this impervious area, everything on this site is required to be captured. So we will be capturing all the water on this site. It's up to a 100-year storm. So here's his the current close-up of the site itself. You can see in the front parking lot here, he's proposing some substantial, what they're called Coltex, or basically under drainage systems or kind of catchment areas, and one in the back under this small play area. This still needs to be coordinated with the geothermal fields, because this one in the back, where we do have that's where this geothermal is primarily located. So there may be some tweak to that back one. And then he has this open air detention basin, which is beyond the developed area. So there'll be some more tree clearing back there, and then if we opt to go this way, and an open air detention. So are we required here to detain and infiltrate the 100-year storm? As I said, he's got a large area of detention and a smaller area in the back. He's picking up all the front of the site and half the front of the building in the front, and the portion of the roof and the back playground areas with that smaller detention area in the back.
And also, if I'm correct, the placement of the infiltration areas, to the point that we made earlier about regrading on the site, we're placing them on the downhill slopes, both from the grading perspective, because those are fill areas. So the Coltex system is a buried area that'll be placed closer to the existing grade and then built up, as opposed to having to dig down and then replace that soil.
Right, so we have these, they're like voids, right? So we're gonna put these large tanks that'll take up some of that. And I'm urging them to look at pushing these a little more south, because that's where it actually does start to drop off faster.
Yeah, I was going to say probably want to get a little bit of space between those front three as
that was one of the
well.
conversations we've had about trying to really kind of line the southern side of the site with these, because that's really where we have to build up.
Yeah, Marathon, under all the parking lots, has the same system, and
Yeah.
that's where the water is captured. It's like a bunch of tunnels under there.
Yeah, it's a pretty common system to use for this.
Dan, one thing we'll have to consider is if the school does want to consider photovoltaic canopies down the road, that's an important consideration of where those things land underneath the parking lot.
That was one of the other things about trying to push them down into this area more, because it makes more sense too, because there's so much grade change there.
Yeah.
To have fill the void with these rather than fill the void rather not bring in any dirt. Bringing in dirt is expensive, and it's not something we'd want to do if we can avoid it as the best possible. Which is why we're trying that basement as well, similar strategy. So this is the entire plan here. He's showing the utilities coming in off of Hayden Road. And he's showing that, you can see that other gray box that's down by the field there. That's the other proposed detention area for the field and that gravel parking lot there. It could be slightly smaller because I think he may be thinking that that is not a gravel parking lot when it is. So we might be able to shrink that one a bit.
Have they looked at sewer service going off to the south?
We haven't looked at that yet, but that's where I think we had all decided that would be, if we can get access to that, that's the best possible, closest route. Plus the fact that it doesn't need to be pumped. So he's noted that as we all know, the neighborhood to the south has the largest runoff. Right now, they are required to meet or exceed, they're going to meet or exceed the requirements of not having any of the water that we're creating. You can make it any worse, basically. I think the goal is to exceed that.
Right, if those of you that have been down there during the rainstorms, the water runs off the site into the street today. So that's the baseline. It just literally runs off the hillside around these houses that are just in the white zone, just off the bottom left there, and then runs to the nearest catch basin. So that's how it's being handled today in those locations.
So when you say meets or exceeds, it could potentially make it better for those
Yes,
folks
that would
in
be the
neighborhoods.
intention, is to make it better. The minimum is to meet.
Yeah.
Meaning that whatever we do cannot make the situation worse anywhere around the site.
And part of the strategy that they use is that they'll line curbs along the edge of a lot of those roadways, because the curb serves two functions. It keeps the car on the road, but it also keeps the water on the impervious surface, so that it directs it to the system as opposed to just letting it run off to the neighboring land and further down the hill. So it really serves as an interruption of a lot of the stormwater that would otherwise shed into the neighborhoods.
So, so this is a topic and a question that's coming up for the forum too. We'll get to the forums later, but I think having an understanding from the public about the stormwater management would be an important topic in an upcoming forum as well.
Yeah, I think once we kind of tighten all this up, like this will be big on the website too, I think, so anybody who has not tuned into any of our forums or needs to understand better, they'll have access to this, because I think it was kind of a sticky point with some neighbors after the marathon school, and just want to be as transparent about what this looks like to them,
And
once it's designed.
yeah, I think that's a good point, Tim, because one of the things I was thinking similarly is, and this might be a working group topic, is I'm thinking about these kinds of things and the website. So right now, for the most part, what goes up on the website are this packet, like this full deck. And as we start to get into more detail, I think breaking these up so that it's easier for people. So somebody who lives in that neighborhood who just wants to know the stormwater plan, to point them back to the June 27th meeting packet and have them scroll through. The more of these we could get kind of as their own links, I think for us on the committee too, we'll get questions, and again, easier to just give them a link than point them to it. So we might want to think about kind of the architecture of documents on there as a future working group topic.
Absolutely, it's been a discussion so far in the work group that the FAQs need to be looked at and drafted, and can certainly point them back to the meetings where these robust conversations occurred, as well as the meeting packets that are there that respond to those topics. Good.
One thing I'll say about the groundwater is, it's important to account for seasonal fluctuations. So I would not discount the 2 feet that you got from the geotech. When you say geotech, is it geotech borings or?
Borings.
Yeah. So to me, it's like anywhere between 2 and 5 feet. So there could be fluctuations. Just
There could
keep
always
that
be
in mind.
seasonal fluctuation.
I mean, the good news and that's an important comment to make, and that should be considered by the engineering firm. The good news is that when we dug those test pits, it was in the rainy month, and actually raining while we were out there. So there was a high level of water in the area. On a related topic, we're filing for the ANRAD evaluation, so that application went in today. And so what that is to determine whether the wetland at the back of the Waterfresh property is considered a vernal pool or just a wetland, because then that comes with different requirements on setbacks. Wetlands, you can encroach within the 100-foot, but a vernal pool you can't. And so that will make a difference on what the pickup drop-off tail looks like just at the edge of the plan there.
Yeah. The other thing that does is it sets the boundaries of all the wetlands in stone, for at least for 3 years of stone. So it means that they'll, whatever they agree to, they'll go out there and review it with LEC, our environmental engineer, and they'll say that's the boundary of the wetland for this project for the next 3 years.
And the purpose of doing that now is that it allows the design team to actually do these calculations and understand that they're going to stay, versus going to the first submission, hearing that feedback, and then redesigning on the fly. So it allows us to lock in what we know the boundaries to be at the start of the design process.
Does the uncovered, the uncovered catch area that's there, if we have to do replication, does that kind of serve the purpose of a wetlands replication?
I think it could.
Okay.
It's just the way there's a different way to do that, but I think you could. The other opportunity that's there is potentially using that, having a path around that and using it for an educational purpose as well.
Yep.
That's kind of a low cost thing to do because we're building this for a different reason,
Right.
but then you could take advantage of it.
That's great.
And I believe in the vernal pool evaluation, Dan, they did find a fish
There was a lowly fish in there.
as part of the vernal pool analysis, which I think the outcome of the report was that it's not a vernal pool.
If there's a fish in there, technically it's not a vernal pool.
So that's a
But I think they were nervous because it's only a fish.
a fish.
Don't go fishing.
Who threw it in?
Someone threw him in.
Who threw him in?
As a publicly recorded meeting, nobody in this group threw any fish in. But it's a helpful point because if they decide that it is a vernal pool as part of that process, it would have an effect on the location of the parking and road, but it would not have an effect on the building. And I think that's important for this committee to understand the outcome of that research.
It's a more stringent requirement and setback.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you presenting this, and again, especially in response to the questions we've been getting from some of the neighbors in that space at some of our recent forums, so it was well timed. So next, we're talking about GC versus...
Yep, so Chris had made a presentation to you guys back in April, and I didn't put that whole thing back in the packet, but we can certainly talk about it. I just put 2 slides in the packet, but just to refresh everybody, the options that are in front of you are to go with a general contractor, which is a design bid build, which is the design team completes the drawings and then bids it out, and the lowest cost price wins the contract, and they deliver exactly what's on the drawings. A construction manager, you're hiring a professional, they're on board early on in the process. They help work with the overall team. They give you a guaranteed maximum price, which is an elongated process where they have an open book and start to buy out subcontracts, in some cases individually, in some cases in groups. And so the extension of time is different for when you award a contract. You'll initially award early chunks of it, and then maybe a middle chunk of it, and then the end overall cost of the project. So it's not a finite time when you have a hard bid number like you do with a general contractor. But the critical differences there are that with a CM project versus a get that slide up, yeah. So no, that one's fine. So with a CM, it's a qualifications-based process where you go out multiple rounds of qualifications, you narrow down to a price proposal stage, and then you actually interview and you pick the favorite team. You would negotiate the price of the overall construction contract, and they would get on early and help with planning and doing estimating and reviews. And as I noted, it's open book. One of the main benefits of CM is that you could do early release packages, which is that you can actually get started in construction before the design is even done. That comes with risks, which is why it's a guaranteed maximum price, not the guaranteed price, right? And so as the design evolves, those things can tweak and change. So historically, construction managers pad their numbers earlier on because the design is not done and they're starting to work through some of those mechanics. With a general contractor method, it's the design is what you own. That's what you purchased, and so the design team has a more responsibility to complete the overall design and answer all the questions in the documents that go out to the street, where a construction manager, you can kind of fill the gaps later, it's just as an example. The difference in staffing is that a construction manager will bring a lot more people to the table, which brings a lot of comfort, but also brings with it a lot of paperwork. And so, that's one level of service. A general contractor is a simpler method where they have less staff, but you'll have more effort from the design team and the owner's project manager to kind of fill those gaps and to keep an eye on the contractor and make sure they're doing the work that was required in the bid documents. There's a price premium that can vary, and so, on this slide I talk about it being 5 to 6. I think on the next slide I have it at 4 to 6, and the reason is that the number can be even wider than that. We picked a middle of the road contractor for either a GC or a CM. If you hire a construction manager, there are a lot more options out there, and you have the very frugal, efficient, smaller family company construction management firms, and you have the large corporate international firms. And so you'll pay a different price point depending on which one of those firms that you actually hire. So the delta from CM at risk to a general contractor can be much larger than the 4 to 6% at the end of the day. Because you don't know who you're hiring now, we're putting 4 to 6 out, but the percentage will be more than 6 at the end of the day. That you will save more than 6%. With a general contractor, when you start to get to over $100 million, you have a much narrower pool of bidders. So you got about 5 regular players in Massachusetts that bid $100 million school projects. There's talk that maybe some of the construction managers will start to bid more because more of these jobs are going GC bid, and more of them are getting more expensive. Historically, the GC market at a $30 to $40 million job is a lot more competition, and when you get to 20 million, is even more competition. But the higher the cost, the more they start to kind of fall off. But you do have a pool of 5 regular bidders. We've seen GCs come in from Connecticut and Rhode Island as well for projects that are of this size, and so you could end up with a larger pool than the 5 bidders that regularly bid work. Next slide. So again, just to reiterate, the benefit of CM at risk on this project could be that you have early site packages for foundation. Geothermal is one of the newer trades. You could have a greater ability to help select that particular vendor, but you can also build into the specifications with a general contractor higher standards and a better vetting process. Similarly, with the staffing, CM will bring more staff by default. A GC, you can mandate it. You can put in there that you want a minimum of 2 site supers on the project. You can dictate the overall staff. So you can start to kind of even the playing field a little bit. So there are ways that we as a project team can pack more into the GC project to get some of the benefits of a CM project. CM is best used for complex projects, ones that have phased renovations, ones that are complex, where you need to really work with the school to understand when you can have certain places turned over to you. That's more akin to the other projects in town, such as the Hopkins, right, where you're going to do an addition, but you're also going to do a renovation, and it's a smaller dollar value. You're going to get a lot more value on a project like that, where you bring the CM on board, you let them define the phasing, and they provide the insight to the risks that are associated with it. With an ad reno project, you're getting more risks. There's more unforeseen conditions. There's more propensity for things to go wrong. With the Elmwood site, it's a virgin site where it's a forest. You can map the whole thing with a topography so you understand your starting condition. You're not interfering with other schools. The only overlap here is the shared driveway with Marathon School, so it's not the build behind. You're not working around the school itself. It's just the coordination of kind of pick up and drop off that's key here. So you're really isolated. And so this project itself lends itself to being a very easy project for a general contractor. It's a large, attractive project. It's its own dedicated site with the exception of a shared driveway. It's a clean site. You're not getting into unforeseen conditions from beyond a natural state. There's no demolition and abatement on this project. Again, another higher risk factor that would lend itself to having a more usable vehicle being the CM at risk. A CM at risk contract allows you to put allowances and holds in there. So as conditions arise, you can immediately use a hold or an allowance, which is money set aside in a contract for that reason, to move forward. With a design bid build, it's the building committee that comes back and makes the decision. So timing will be the essence. If we go GC bid, we would recommend at the time that we establish a dollar threshold for the chair or another liaison amongst the committee to have when time is of the essence. And we'll get into what the right threshold is down the road, should that be the decision. The other point I wanted to make is the overall schedule. With a construction manager, you can start earlier because design is not done, and so you can move in September of 2027. Right now, we're conservatively showing moving in January of 2028. The construction schedule under a GC bid would wrap up in end of October into November, and then it allows 2 months of commissioning. So the CM could get you in earlier, but then that commissioning overlaps with the occupants moving into the building in September. Here, you're finishing the building in the kind of, I'll call it a mid-semester of Halloween, and then you're getting the 2 months to move all your furniture in, kick the tires, work the system through with the mechanicals, so that when you do move in January, all those bugs have been kind of worked out. So it's the more conservative approach. If permitting goes really smoothly, we can get you in September with a GC bid, but I'm not promising that to anybody at this point because there's still the potential for the MIPA triggered permitting here, and that is not something we can control. So from a outward-facing decision to the public, it's the January start date. There is a potential to improve on that, but we have to kind of wait and see where permitting lands, and then we can readdress that in 2024 as to when we're ready to go out to bid in 2025, which will influence that decision.
And would you have to move in January of 28 once it's done? I've heard teacher concerns from Hopkins particularly because at Elmwood, everybody's gonna go. So it would be an easy move for Elmwood. But at Hopkins, half of the students would go, and there would be an expectation that fourth graders would transition to a new situation.
So that's actually an excellent question
Mid-year.
that I have a great answer for, but I wasn't expecting, which is that normally you have to move in right away because you're typically going to demolish the building right behind you, and then it costs money to not move in right away. In this case, where it's a new site and you're not demolishing Elmwood, and technically you could stay in Hopkins, there is the potential that the fourth grade could stay for that extra half a semester and move in the fall. So that is an option that the school department could consider as a separate track as to when to bring the fourth grade over.
Okay.
But the 2 and 3, you would want to move in that January timeframe to make use of that building right away. And we do mid-year move-ins all the time. It used to be frowned upon a decade ago, but time is money, right? And so all other towns have got around that it's a natural point. We actually do them in February and April too, believe it or not, depending on the school, because they really want to get the asset
The school we
going.
visited had just moved in, because I'm sure because they did demolish.
Right.
And I don't know that Elmwood would have any reluctance to doing it. It was Hopkins folks that had sort of mentioned that would be complicated for their staff and for the students.
And I think, being an optimist, I think their opinions will change when they see
I
the shiny
hope
new
so,
school,
too.
and they'll be
Yeah.
more than happy to be the first person to use that floor, right? Because
Yeah.
I think all those concerns will melt away when they realize the upgrade they're getting by going to a new facility versus the current facility.
But I think it's a good point. It's good to know it's an operational decision because you could continue to domino, right? Like
Yeah.
you could,
Right.
So if we do move the fourth, so then does Hopkins have full, or do you then start moving? It gets complex.
Yeah.
So it's good to know that we have the optionality with that.
And those fourth graders that are, if they start the year at Hopkins, they would only be moving into a new Elmwood
Right.
building for a
And
few
then-
months, and they're getting an
Right.
extra transition that
Yeah.
maybe won't make sense when we get to that point.
Yeah.
They may want to stay because they're going right back there anyway,
Right.
so it's, it's
Well, right, those kids that would be in fourth grade would be
Back to
bouncing
the
back and then
right.
bouncing back again if they went to the Elmwood.
Or I would say on the flip side of all of that, we may or may not be in a renovation / construction project at that same time. So moving those fourth graders out may be a huge benefit to
Also true.
what we're doing. Outside
And
of
there
the
might
school.
be families and students that would really be psyched to be able to have the opportunity to be in a new building even for just a little while.
And a very important point that I want to make for the folks who may be viewing this is that is a decision that has plenty of time to be considered and discussed and publicly debated. and doesn't affect whether we are moving forward with CM at risk or moving forward with design bid build at this time.
Agreed. The answer of the district gets to figure it out is, I think, the sufficient answer that we need. I think you're right. We go way too far down this road. I want to clarify just one thing before I open it up for overall questions. So, and I know this was sort of resident in there, but so you talked about the qualified construction managers. The general contractors that are available to bid on this have to go through the similar screening for the MSBA. It's their selected pool. So these are qualified general contractors by the MSBA. Am I correct?
Not correct, but not wrong either. So
Okay.
this committee will establish a pre-qualification committee, which by state statute, not MSBA statute, would require one architect, at a minimum, one architect, one OPM, and 2 representatives from the town to be on it. So it's a minimum of 4 committee members. And we would go through a qualification process where we then put out there that they have to submit in order to be eligible to bid on the project. And then we'll check the qualifications. We'll actually call references on those firms. And you'll lose, up to 10% of the bidders potentially through that process. So anywhere from 5 to 10% of the people that submit may trim off because of bad references, because of inability from financially to meet a job of this size. You'll see people stretch like, oh, I can do a $2 million HVAC, so I can definitely do a $10 million HVAC, and it's not always that simple.
Yeah.
So those are the types of things that the pre-qual committee that you establish will evaluate. So the people that are left to bid will have already made it through that initial bidding phase. Should something go wrong in between when you pre-qualify and when you bid, which could be a 3-month process between when you finish the qualifications and when you bid it, say somebody got debarred or got kicked off another project, that's new information that can be considered by the committee, and you can still vote not to accept the low bid because you have new information that contractor is no longer qualified.
Okay. I think that's, and again, thank you for that, because I think it's super helpful for the public to understand. So sometimes people hear low bid and they get a little nervous, but the fact that there is all of that.
Don't think you always have to take the low bidder. We oftentimes don't always recommend it because they're, by this stage, it happens more on the smaller scale projects. You don't take the low bidder. By the time you get to a job of this size, we've qualified them that first time pretty thoroughly. And, generally they're a good firm to make it through.
And one big distinction between CM at risk and design bid build in that respect is the pre-qualification process applies to, in design bid build, it's the general contractors as well as any of the filed sub-bidders, which is, I believe, 21 trades that are designated by state law. And within those trades, you're allowed to decide who is allowed to bid on your building. Folks who are outside of that process with GC, you have less control over who they choose. Whereas in a CM situation, you'll interview the CM, and that's your way of selecting them. So you'll ask for proposals based on criteria that you set. You'll interview the ones you're interested in, you'll select based on that. You'll still do a pre-qualification process for those 21 trades. But you can have discussions with the CM about who they select for their other work. Whereas with the GC, they're going to work with the folks that they want to work for those non-filed sub-bid trades.
With the GC, you have no decision on who they carry for their low bid numbers. So to break that down, that of the 100% of your overall project cost, probably 45% of it are the filed trades. So that's the same no matter which method you choose. So the remaining 55%, the contractor gets to pick. And with the CM process, they would submit the bids, we would see them, and we can help select the final low bidder for that individual trade. With a general contractor, it's an all or none. And so there is a difference there on that level.
One last clarification before, again, I open it up to questions, is on this one, unlike interior and exterior materials, you're looking for both?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and then one other point I wanted to make, this is more for down the road, but it's relative to the conversation, which is bidding alternates. If you go with a general contractor method, they have to be taken in order of priority. So you don't want a lot of them. You don't want to throw it out there and see what the market comes back with 15 items, because you have to take them in the same order. You can't pick and choose. With a CM, you can pick and choose a little bit more if they don't mess up the ranking of the filed sub-bidders. So you have a little bit more ability to kind of pick and choose. But we still always don't recommend going out with lots of bid alternates because it confuses the bidders. They're trying to play the game of how hungry am I for this job, and are they going to take bid alternates 7, 10, and 15, right? Because it affects how they put their number together. So you want it as clean as possible. It shows interest in the project, and we'll have a better result from a project team and a number at bid day.
Questions from the?
So when I'm looking at this, the thing that jumps out to me is this 5 to 6%, because on a project of this scope, and my math is not my strong suit, but it feels like we're talking about a $10 million difference. Is that?
Yes, it certainly can be. And so the difference on bid day, which is not necessarily reflected in the number, where it could be over 6, is that, of those, 5 to 7 firms that bid it, one can come in a lot lower, right? We're trying to say we think this is where the number's going to come in compared to where we think a CM will be, and so it could be a $10 million savings.
But I assume, Jeff, if we did the design bid build and there's 4 or 5 potential candidates, they're all equally qualified. No? I mean, for a job of $150 million?
For a CM or for
design bid build?
GC.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they come with, any firm has different references, right? So I'd say they're, equally qualified is a reasonable statement. I think,
Yeah.
they come with different experiences, and so we check the references. So the passing score is a 70 out of 100 to make it through. There's other metrics you have to meet minimum per category in the process, but a person with a 70 still passes, and so you may have people that are a 95 and you may have someone that's a 75, and so they're technically equally qualified, but they're not equal.
So as I recall with the CM at risk, in the plan process, there's a lot of involvement with the CM and the architect team and the engineering team. But there's less involvement in the design bid. Design bid overall would save money, but we have to be absolutely certain that the architectural package and structural package they get is exactly what we want. So it leads me to the question, is there a way that, and I suspect Bob's package will be just that, but is there a way we get a third party to look at Bob's package? Because I didn't grow up under a stump. These guys with these multi-million-dollar jobs have a whole staff to look for things that Bob may have missed that they can get us for later.
Yep.
I'd rather find them up front and have them bid on those. So if we went design bid build, which I think you guys are steering us to, I would really want, and of course we'd need Bob's cooperation with this, to hire a third-party person to look at these things before it goes out to bid. These are the potential pitfalls. These are the things, or they're dead perfect. Just to protect the taxpayers. Would that be?
Yeah, no,
people often do
it's
that?
absolutely an option, and something we used to do a lot with GC work. There are firms out there. ReadyCheck was one that we used, a decade ago, a lot, and they used to really kind of overlay the drawings to make sure the architectural and the electrical really work together, and that's a valuable service because it helps flush out change orders.
Yeah.
Over time, Chris and I and others in my office would find a lot different things, which is, you ignore the fact that they overlap, but does it work?
Yeah.
Right. So those types of vendors say, is it coordinated, and we can buy that for a certain amount of money, or we can actually, farm out reviews, whether internally in our office with various other verticals, or we can bring in another consultant or a peer review design firm even to do it. And so we could certainly park in lots of money to help make sure that's been vetted.
As you recall, and I keep bringing back Marathon, but we use the CM at risk method, and we work with the contractor all through the process, and it was really helpful. And they actually found things that could be done better, therefore cheaper, and saved us money. But I really like the idea of, if we have a really good set of plans, this is what you're bidding on. But at the end of the day, there's a whole lot less work for us, providing we give them that good set of plans, right?
No, that's a great point.
And it saves money.
Yep.
So my question would be, of the 5 players that are in this area, 100 million or more, have you worked with all of them that you're thinking about? right now, or is that an arbitrary, there's 4 or 5 people when you mentioned that?
Yeah, no, we've worked with all of them.
Okay. And with those, if you think back over the last 3 or 4 or 5 years and/or jobs, how much of what Mike is describing did you find? Was it another million, 2 million, or 10%, 5% that the architects didn't find, but they did? Like, how big of an issue have you seen?
Great question. So,
It's gonna vary.
yeah, well, it varies, but so I mean, change orders can be on a new construction could be 2 to 4%, right? Traditionally we tell you to carry 5%. More of the risk is in the site and the abatement and demo. You've eliminated that abatement and demo risk, right? And so you have the site risk, and you have, did the designers leave anything off risk? Change orders can then change because of your decisions. So the school committee or school department asks for something, you guys have savings on bid day, you make other changes to the project in construction. So it can have an influence in the overall percentage of change orders. But make no mistake, I mean, a general contractor has to come in low, and so that's their position. They had to get the job on day one, so they will look for ways to make their money back, right? And so a CM will take care of things. They're not taking care of it out of their pocket. They're taking care of all of the allowances and the holds they already tucked away to make themselves look good, right? And a GC, they're not the villain. They just don't have that security blanket that a CM has, so they're going to ask you. Now, some of these 5 people that we mentioned do both. We work with them both as a GC and as a CM. They try and be service oriented with both, but you'll see a difference because they have to have a difference. They had a blanket on one, they didn't have a security blanket on the other, so things can't go away. They have to be changes to the owner. But a couple of percent. I mean, generally errors and omissions from the design team is around 1%. It's kind of the industry standard. They're not perfect. Their sub-consultants aren't perfect, so you'll see that level of change. There are review periods built in. The MSBA does a peer review each time we submit. They're higher level comments. They're not really detailed. Chris and our team will do a drawing review ourselves. We'll help flush out a lot more topics. The challenge with the final review is just building in the month essentially to do that, because you need the team to do the peer review for 2 weeks, and then you need them to have a couple of weeks to incorporate it. And so that can lead to when we put it out to the street. But if we're working with the January timeframe, we have that buffer, right? If we were really trying to hit September, it's harder to build that buffer into the zone. All good questions.
Well, so is that the biggest risk of going with the general contractor, is the potential of all these things they nickel and dime us on compared to the CM? Is that the biggest risk?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't even use risk. It's an annoyance, maybe. Is there a better word for it? Like, a CM is a partnership. They're at your table. They've put the money away for all of us to make the job run smooth.
Yeah.
The general contractor will come back to you with his handout, and we as a group will have to say this is fair. They're owed it, and you guys call your meeting and you review it, and it pains you to pay the check because you're seeing each time you pay it. With a CM, you're paying it at the beginning with the guaranteed maximum price.
Yeah.
And then they're spending the money for you, and at the end they say, hey, here's all the money that's left in the wallet, you guys can have this amount back. So at the end of the day, the CM will hand you money back. The GC will start low and end a little higher, but at the end of the day, you're going to spend more for the CM, without a doubt. And it's just a question of, is it at 4, 6, or 8% delta? And it's hard to say that because when you get a family-run CM, they're more lean and mean, and when you have an international conglomerate, which many other school projects hire, it's just a different level of cost return.
The other thing that can't be lost in that discussion is that the CM is at risk to a certain degree, and so part of the way that they build what the price of your school will be is to identify certain avenues where they want to protect their own risk. And we have seen some get creative in how they describe the holds, so that when you think that you are buying something at the beginning as part of that CM because they're offering you a service, when rubber hits the road and you get to the point of needing to use some of that hold, they may be very defensive of it to protect their own risk.
Sure.
And not want to spend it and hit you with the change order anyway. We see a lot of that with surrounding filed sub bids, because while the CM is supposed to, in concept, review the drawings and identify implied intent. The requirement for filed subbidders, which in the CM world are called trade subcontractors, is that the designers still need to identify 100% of their scope in the documents, even though the CM's supposed to find the gaps. And so we find that that becomes a point of friction with CMs, because how come you didn't identify this gap? Well, the trade bidder should have picked it up. Why didn't the designer put it on the drawings? And then you're in the same conversation you're in with the GC world anyway. And that's not everyone, but it is a, to put it bluntly, it's a game that you play in the process of administering a construction contract.
Thank you.
Jigger, do you have any questions?
No questions.
Okay. Susan and Tim?
I guess I pick on this because you were part of that project. You chose a CM for the Marathon School, which is essentially the same site. Why the change between the two?
The committee made the decision that, and I think some things are reactionary, right? I think they were coming off of a couple of jobs where, they may have they didn't love the contractor as much, and the idea of selecting a qualified firm is beneficial, right? You get your choice of the litter, right? And when you're in that smaller dollar range, because that was bid in the $30 million range, there's a much bigger pool of both GC bidders and CMs, but that means you're more at risk with a lot of GC bidders you might not want. And so it allows you to kind of clear the deck and just pick the cream versus having to sift through it. When you get up to this higher level, a lot of those other risks kind of fall off with a smaller pool of bidders. Marathon could have gone GC bid. Some of the site complexities that we're even talking about tonight with water runoff and fills and soil conditions were one of the conversations that led us to decide and consider CM at risk. But having built that building, not all those risks came to fruition, and seeing it again, I think they're not the same risks that we perceived 8 years ago in terms of the site itself. So I think it's easier. I think this is a clean project. I mean, what I want to see, I'm sure it makes my life easier in a lot of ways because they're a team player, but I do more work in paperwork and other aspects. So it's the same level of effort. I just change how I administer our level of effort. CM allows you to really pick the ideal team for you, but that comes at a cost. Like, you may have 4 CMs and their cost just to hire them is $1 million difference between the top and the bottom guy. So you're then deciding at that table, well, I really loved bidder number 3, but he's $1 million instead of bidder number 2. And I've had to make that decision in towns of say, well, I can't justify $1 million then, so I'm picking the lower guy anyway, even though I would rather pick the higher guy, because how do I tell the town it was worth $1 million for this company over that company? And so you'll have to face that decision if you go CM at risk. So cost doesn't go away. It's a different way of considering costs for the CM.
I think
Go ahead.
another thing may be that we saw a big shift from design bid build to CM over a period of time. And then as the MSBA and others started to collect more cost data, there was kind of a lag in determining that there was in fact that premium.
At the time we did Marathon, we were one of the last schools that benefited from a 1% reimbursement from the state. They took it away right at that time, but we were grandfathered in because of when we had got invited into the process. And so the projects that were 6 months behind us did not get a 1% benefit. So at that point, they were still dangling the carrot until they did the math that Bob realized, which is they dangled the carrot and both the town and the state paid more. So they took that away. And now it's really up to the towns whether they want to decide. And there's no benefit to that anymore. So that was another big factor, because when you think about a 1% increase in your reimbursement, it's real money. And so that was another factor that the committee studied heavily.
And another thing that we see is sort of the management of ongoing things. In a design bid build situation, you're going to sort of describe things in absolutes. So you'll set work rules for how they can use the Marathon driveway as part of the bid package. Whereas a CM at risk, you'll have an ongoing discussion with them about when can I use this, when can I not use this, because you're hiring them as a service as opposed to them taking on the risk of an absolute rule and when can we flex it and try and get away with something to our benefit. Not get away in terms of cheat the town, but maybe I can get somebody in there at 10:30, even though the rule says I can't do it till 11. Like, and they'll assume risk decisions based on what those rules that you set for them are. You know, that's probably one of the biggest factors to push you one way or another, because there's kids involved, is how that interaction between the Elmwood site and the Marathon site needs to live. And so we would set strict rules for how that interaction can occur as part of a GC bid, whereas you would work with the CM to figure out what can work for everyone, and you get a little more of that back and forth. And that flexibility can have cost savings at some times, but it also may be risk that they decide to build into their GMP so that they have that money available. And if they don't use it, they give it back to you at the end, and they show up in the paper as, we just gave $3 million back to Hopkinton. It's awesome.
Sure. Right. But there's always the ability with the general contractor to work with them. At the end of the day, they get evaluated and a score at the end of the project that, you know, that we and you will put together. And so for that scoring rating, an 80 is a failure, right? So, you know, they want to be at 90, because when you start to have a lower score, the next committee that looks at them says, I don't know about them.
We got a 75.
Right, exactly. And so, you know, that plays into it. So, they'll work with you, you know, generally.
Can I ask a follow-up? Is there a difference in construction quality control between a CM and a design bid build? Like, are you paying more attention to one, or who's paying more attention to one or the other, if that's a necessity?
There is a difference, and the difference is that this team has to carry more of the water than that team. So with a CM, a typical CM would give you 4 people on the job site. You know, a project manager, an assistant project manager, a super, and assistant super. So you have 4 sets of eyes there, sometimes 5 or 6, depending on the phase of the project, all running it. With a GC, you're getting 2. All right, so you're getting half the manpower, and they're running around a large site. So, you know, we'll have boots on the ground for you there, and the design team may have to come out twice a week instead of once a week. You know, they've got to be more concrete with their direction to make sure it's fully vetted before they give it out there. So they need to be there to look at the details, versus having a CM get started and then come out the next day and kind of work it out. So there's more pressure on the project team to fill that gap. It is a short answer.
Perfect, thank you.
So I think one of the biggest challenges that we're going to have as we get to November and town meeting is there is so much actual variance in the number that we're going to come to town meeting with, right? Like we talk about, if it's 160 million, you then have to subtract out the MSBA reimbursement, even though we have to ask for 160 million. The HVAC system is 15% of the cost, but we know we're getting a significant amount of that back in rebates. But we still have to ask for the full amount up front. It's hearing that there are sort of differences between the two, but both are sort of equally workable, and that design bid build fits this project. It's really difficult for me to turn away from the idea of potentially taking $7 to $10 million off of the front end number that we're asking for at town meeting. If I thought we were going to potentially compromise any part of the project, then I'd be willing to tell the story of kind of how it works and how we might get some money back, and we do on Marathon. But hearing that, you know, from Vertex and from Perkins, that this is not, we're not skimping on the construction by choosing this. It feels hard to not go GC at this point.
Can I just ask a follow-up question?
Absolutely.
To that? When we first put out the $170 million, whatever it was that using a CM?
Yes.
Yeah, so the number of the
So that's a
170.
true number potentially coming off that 6%.
Yeah.
Right, the 174 million had assumed the CM project. There's been a lot of decisions, both up and down, since the February timeframe when we made those decisions. So regardless of which method you pick, the number will never directly tie back to where we were, because you've made a lot of decisions besides this one.
Yeah.
Do have a question, sorry,
Yes.
on the differences. The CM approach, you say there's the ability to issue early bid packages, which is obviously helpful from a schedule standpoint. on the flip side, is it a schedule risk with the GC approach, not having that ability?
So what we're suggesting with the GC approach is that we've shifted the start date out a little so that the design has to be done. So that's why we're saying that we would move in the January start of school versus the September start of school. So we've adjusted for that. The CM with the early bid packages still assumes we have a somewhat favorable permitting process, because if we're not all the way through MEPA, even though we can have access to the bid package, we can't get started because we don't have our permits in place. So I'd say the CM start date is a little more risky because that's the more aggressive start date. That potentially could get pushed up for permitting, and you could slip closer to the January timeframe there.
We've had good success with building in what we call a submittal period into the schedule for GCs to address whatever lead time concerns there are, because it gives them a period to work through a lot of the submittals that are necessary for those early items. But when they're bidding, the design has to be done at the same place. So there's more likelihood of the move date slipping because of lead time anomalies that come up at that time. It's hard to predict where that'll be in 2 years. Whereas the CM would offer you sort of that real-time purchasing data so that you could make a decision. But even with pre-purchasing some of that, there's still risks involved and challenges with doing that.
The GC schedule at 27 months is generous. If this was 3 years ago, pre-pandemic, I wouldn't have done more than 2 years. But the GC, because you can't do the early bid package, takes away some of the benefits of CM being allowing you to buy the equipment directly and then assign it. So there's a little more flexibility built into the CM process that the pandemic took full advantage of. Just by default, they had access to those tools. So we're building a more conservative GC schedule. I still think you can do it in 2 years, but again, I'm not committing to that until we see how the next year and a half plays out. But when we get to the point of bidding it in April of 2025, we may as a group say, no, they could do it 2 years. That we have normalized, we are back to normal times. We can still hit September by bidding it now. And until we get to that point, I just can't make the commitment. But I think there's a very real possibility that both delivery methods could land with a September opening date of 2027.
Another way to say that is the GC bids on both the cost of the work and the schedule to deliver it. So if you shorten that schedule, they're going to bid on what they feel is necessary to meet that schedule. So we try and find the right balance for the point at which we're bidding it and for the client's needs to make sure that the price that we get meets their needs for both the cost and the schedule.
Yeah.
Right. There's always the ability to do overtime, even with a GC bid. You could opt to say, hey, I want you to accelerate. Let's put some more money into this to make up some time in the schedule. But that's traditionally done more with the CM than the general contractor.
I think we built in some flexibility in a January move-in, although not ideal for the teachers, is that February can go to April pretty easily and do that break rather than this break type of thing, right?
So are we feeling aligned?
Sure.
Yes.
Should we have a motion?
I move that the building committee consider the design bid build package for the new school.
Delivery method, yeah.
Yeah, delivery method.
Second.
Okay. Motion by Mike, second by Bill. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Unanimous.
It's hard to pass away the savings that we can appreciate, especially when we're really beholden to the taxpayers and wanting to make sure that people are getting best educational piece, of course, but also at a price that we can most afford. So.
Absolutely.
Just gotta make sure if you want a dishwasher, you gotta tell us now.
I want a dishwasher.
Ice maker, that's
Telling you
another
now.
And we have 5 voting members tonight,
We have
correct?
5 voting members, yep.
That's what happened last time. Cost us $125,000 for a stupid dishwasher.
Okay, so.
We love it, though, Mike.
We still save money.
We use it every day.
We're talking forum?
Yep, so the last forum went well. There was a lot of better attendance, right? There was a lot of, good, tough questions, which is what you want. We want engagement. A lot of them had to do around cost, and, we demonstrated the decisions the committee has already made to date, and we talked about the ones that were coming, many of which you've made over the last couple of meetings. So we think having another forum this summer, if not two, makes sense. The next forum, if we pick the July timeframe, I think with summer vacations being all virtual would be the better method, because people actually can tune in wherever they are once they have a link. We would present at that July forum the stormwater presentation you've seen tonight, or a prettier version of that. The schematic design floor plans that have settled down now that you've seen the feedback. What the building elevations that's being proposed, which would be the one that was discussed at the last meeting. We don't want to over-design the images at this point. This is not about sales mode. This is about showing where the project is in the process. So, it'll generally be the images you've seen to date in that regard. We'll talk about the decision to go GC bid, and then the schedule that remains ahead in terms of that would be the next forum. We're open to dates. Your next meeting is a month from now, which is July 25th. So we were thinking maybe the week before that to present all the data that you've had seen to date yourselves and those topics. And so maybe in or around July 18th, maybe an appropriate next step, rather. The other forum that may follow on after that, or could be folded into this one, would be feedback on traffic. That was the other topic that was discussed at the last forum and had a lot of feedback related to it. I think the project team has some work to do in terms of finishing the traffic report itself. There are some other open questions from the committee back to the engineers that we want to get back in front of you, and then we also want to review it with the town departments too, with the recommendations that are there. So I assume that won't be all buttoned up by July 18th. So we're assuming that maybe the first week or second week of August to have another virtual meeting focused more on traffic and any other feedback that's come out of the next committee, community forum, or anything else the committee wants to talk about. And again, hammering home the schedule and next steps for that particular forum.
Do you have a date for that in mind?
Don't. Could be the first week of August. I won't be here, but Chris and the design team will be. I mean, that would be Vinod, so we just got to check with him for traffic. So we're thinking that August.
Okay, that's fine. But July 18th is a specific date that you're thinking?
We were thinking a week before your presentation. It could go back to a Wednesday. We've done a lot on Wednesday, or we could stick with Tuesdays because we know this committee is generally available on Tuesdays. But we're open and flexible on the July date.
So I definitely like the virtual meetings, virtual forums. I mean, in general, I think we've gotten better engagement, no matter when we have them, with the fully virtual. I think we've discovered it's really hard to find a perfectly convenient time for everyone to come out to a physical location. So, and I think especially in the summer, because it also seems to make it easier for people to watch it later. I think it's probably easier to watch a virtual forum that's done over Zoom, and like even watching this meeting from it. So, and I think from a topic perspective, it makes sense. I do think, as we think about the timeline of this committee looking to approve a final, design, and then going to the school committee and the select board in August for those endorsements, I think we have to have another public forum before that where we talk about traffic. I just don't think we can, after the feedback we had in the last one, I think we know we've got work to do, but I do agree with Jeff. I think we've got to meet with some of the other departments in town, public safety, DPW, et cetera, to make sure that we've got some of those considerations in mind. So I think this setup makes sense. The only thing I would say is we'll get more into the specifics kind of design of these forums, but despite it being the summer, we've seen a significant uptick in all of our, in most recent forums, in some of the discussions that are out there in town. There's a higher level there's an increasing level of engagement, so let's make sure we leave a good amount of time for Q&A in both of these.
I suspect that has a lot to do with reality setting in.
Yeah.
It's funny
Maybe I should look at this now.
how that works. Okay.
So does that wrap up our agenda?
Yeah, so we don't need to make a decision tonight, but to your point, your last point there, we'll just need to firm up the other boards when we can meet with them in August.
Yes.
So we just want to have that tightened up.
Yeah.
The other item that I wanted to note for tonight's discussion is, so the site contractor invoice that you approved tonight came in under that original budget that we had set aside. So we'd set aside about $4,000 for the contractor to dig the test pits. That came in at, I think it was $2,200 in the invoice packet tonight. We are going to need to use them again, and so the reason for that is that when we approved the geothermal test well, the length of the rig is not going to traverse
Can't fit in
that area without having a wider path blazed for it. So we're going to need a bigger excavator than the smaller one we had there to kind of knock the small trees out of the way so he can actually get to the back of the site. And then they need a level platform area in order to do the drill rig work. And so we're going to need a couple of grand more. So we have the balance of that 4,000, which is about 1,800 or so. But if the committee's okay with delegating to John the ability to approve a couple of grand more, we'll work with the contractor about their availability and get that set up. Right now, unfortunately, everybody's busy, and so the geothermal test well itself is targeting around
Late August.
late August. So it won't be here in time to confirm the size of the field, so we're still going to be going into the estimate with the more conservative number of wells.
Yeah.
And that'll be the number we bring to town meeting. But at the start of design, when we re-kick off after a town meeting, we'll know the efficiency of that first well and then can immediately parking lot spare change for a future issue should it come up. So if we decide the test well tells us we're more efficient than we conservatively thought with the design, when we restart in December, they'll go from 168 wells to 100 and X, whatever the reduction is, and those dozen wells that we reduce by, whatever the number is, we'll parking lot that as cost, and we don't necessarily need to spend.
And the 168 gives us confidence that the connectivity's not gonna tell us that it's 198.
I think so.
I'll look at it that way, they're the designers.
So, yeah, I'm a little confused on this. So it feels like this geothermal wells number issue is a big deal. And we're not going to know definitive answers until December on that issue?
We'll know it in
September.
In September, which is after when you finalize the number that goes into the state, which also becomes the number you bring to town meeting. You can have John's already talked about the complex roadshow to town meeting. There can be a sound bite that we have a conservative number in there as part of that. So when we get to town meeting floor, we'll know that answer.
Okay.
But it'll be baked into the overall cost. Right, so we're not going to lower the number at town meeting because that creates a whole nother circus of challenges with the state. But you certainly, if you don't need to spend it, you don't have to spend it.
But it'll be disclosed at that November town meeting of what that particular issue is.
It can be, yeah, whatever, you will review the report, you will make a decision if it's, however you want to convey that. If it's a negligible difference, then it's any other topic we discuss here. If it's a significant savings, then it's worth bringing up at town meeting that, hey, we did this test well, we were overly conservative, now there's savings.
It will fall into a category where I think a few things probably will, which is the message from this committee is we will not borrow it if we don't need it. And so if we have the information that says we baked in a conservative number, 168 test wells, by the time November arrives, we know that number's going to come down. We're not going, we're not going to sit here and say, oh, if you all pass this at town meeting, great, we have like an extra $5 million to spend. Like, that's not the approach. We're going to take it down, the borrowing down by the number of wells that are that cost drops down.
It's critical that that number be as low as possible.
Right.
Will we know a definitive number by September? Because the thermal conductivity is just one part of the equation. The other part is the heating and cooling loads. So what's the level of confidence in the loads come September?
Well, they should have the heating and cooling loads figured out.
But we're still at 30% design. I really want to stress that. This is not a final number. The number of wells may go down by more, or it could tweak up a bit, right? I mean, at the end of the day, they're sizing the building based on a 3D model, and we're picking all the skin and envelope, and all that is happening today, but it's still 30% of the design. The designers still have 70% of the way to go. There will be modifications to every aspect of the design, and so I don't want you guys to get hung up on the number of wells.
That's,
right?
that's the message I hope to
Right.
send, because
Yeah, the message is that the building will be able to handle what it needs to handle, right? And not in a cute way, but I'm saying it'll be designed to be efficient, to meet the goals that you guys have established. And, you know, the design will respond to that. And there are times in any project where you make reductions in one area to offset increases in another. I'm not saying that's one of them, but there are other aspects of the project that it's still only the 30% design milestone we're at now. There's a lot of ways to go. And you will make other decisions that, you know, borrow from one pocket to put it in another because of new information or because of decisions have changed along the way. I don't know if you guys want to add to that or.
yeah, I think the reason I bring that up is I'm just thinking it may be a little bit premature to start saying, this is the number and, you know,
No.
let's
Yeah.
come down.
Yeah.
Yeah, we want to go with the number at the end of August is the number.
Right.
However you message new information that comes in after August is up to this committee to decide if that is worthy enough of a footnote at town meeting or whether it's just another data point along the way.
All under the headline of, we will not borrow it if we don't need it.
Yeah.
We'll
And I'm
continue.
saying, talking about in dollars, right?
Yeah.
Like, we will not, yeah.
We'll continue to design a building over the course of the next year with budget milestones where we check in at where we're at and with decisions that will need to be made that may affect some of the things that we're deciding now to set the budget because of market changes, because of priority changes, because of new scope. I mean, Marathon, you made it to construction and you decided to make the building bigger. So there's things out there that happen over the course of a project, but that's why there's a process. So the MSBA's process is they want you to set your budget based on your schematic design at this point in the process. If you decide as a committee that you're going to restrict that allocation that the town makes because of additional information, whether it's the geothermal or something else, then as we get those cost estimates and we have to make decisions about the project, you're going to make those decisions at that time based on what the committee's commitments to that budget are.
Getting back to somebody with a big excavator to make a landing pad for this test drill, do you need more money, Jeff?
Yeah, we'll probably need a couple of grand more.
So do we have the money?
We have the money now that the engineering department was able to give us the 20 grand to even go forward with the geothermal. We have a couple of grand more to spend.
Because the other one came in a little under. what
Right,
we
and he
expected.
came in, right, we-
So it's just a question of rerouting the money
I
we
think
have.
we're in the neighborhood of 7,000 remaining with the full 20,000 from the engineering department, and so we came in a little less than 2 grand under what we were thinking.
So I want to say,
Motion, Mr. Chairman?
so full circle, I think what we'd like to do is get that kind of road built as soon as possible.
Yeah.
That way, if the driller gets between jobs, he can come out here.
I'm ready to give you the money, buddy.
Should we need a vote to authorize?
You would authorize the chair.
Authorize the chair to spend up to $4,000 more or some number
On,
So
on
moved.
site preparation and clearing
okay,
related to the geothermal well.
okay, so he just made that motion.
Yeah, I did.
I heard
It was
it.
excellent.
Okay.
I second it.
Okay, motion by Mike, second by Nancy. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, unanimous?
We settled on 3,000.
I said 4,000.
4,000.
Okay.
Tell Billy, we only got 2,000.
He's not watching at home.
I thought you were gonna tell us you had one of those. I thought you were gonna tell us you had one of those
I'm gonna
excavators.
tell
You
him
could just drive it
tomorrow when I
over.
see him.
Yeah. All right, so was that it?
Yeah.
Then I will seek one more motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Bill, second by Mike. All those in favor? Aye. There's never anybody opposed to adjourning, so we are officially adjourned unanimously at 7:59 PM. Thank you everyone for watching. Thank you to HCAM as always for broadcasting. Have a good night.